So for this week on CyberSchool, we're going back to covering use cases. We've covered all the products and different protocols. We're really beating a dead horse at that point. So I wanted to move on and start talking about more use cases, like specific use cases. We'll have some new product videos coming out in a couple weeks. But for this week, we're going to talk about car dealerships. We actually deal a lot with car dealerships, and this is a really good CyberSchool that we can do because it talks about a relatively standard use case, because with car dealerships, they really focus on two things: loud paging and loud ringing, or as we call it, night ringing. So with the whole setup that we'll kind of go over today, we'll detail different endpoints that you can use to utilize that, and the methodology that I would use if a car dealership reached out to understand what products would be good for their environment. We kind of go over how to evaluate the site, things to look for, and then the right products for that particular use case. So with that, let's talk about some typical requirements that car dealerships will typically request. So of course, they're going to want voice paging out on the car lot that can kind of double as background music, but typically it's mainly just voice paging where they can make calls to, say, specific salespeople that are out there, or maybe not out there, or if they need to, say, make an announcement to a customer, if they've got a service garage that their car's finished and they can come pick up their car, or if there's an unforeseen problem and they got to fork over a whole bunch more money or something like that. But voice paging is very important when you're dealing with car dealerships. And as such, loud ringing of incoming calls is also super important, especially for some of the smaller dealerships where they might be a little bit lower on staff, where they might not have somebody dedicated inside to, say, answer the calls, or they might not have, a fancy VoIP phone system that allows them to get the calls on their own, say, cell phones. They might need that capability, especially in kind of the later afternoon and, maybe even in the evenings, for just loud ringing going through that PA system over the car lot to be able to know, hey, there's a call going, there's somebody's calling in, somebody dash into the office and grab that call. So that way we can make a sale and meet the quota. But other things like announcements in service garages are very useful, maybe to let customers know that their vehicle's finished working on, or to let the techs know, the different jobs that they have coming up, if somebody's going to be working on something more specific, or just general voice paging for those service garages. If they need to, say, grab one of the technicians to come up because there was a complaint and the customer wants to talk to the specific tech that worked on it, voice announcements in the car lot and also in the service garage are super useful. But then you'll also want some kind of a way to notify people in that service area that a car has arrived for service. And that can be things like an intercom, a call button. There's a lot of different varieties of getting that notification that a customer has arrived. There might not be just somebody standing out there with a clipboard, kind of waiting for people to come up. And, with our COVID times, they might not have easily accessible ways for customers to, say, come into a showroom or the service area. They might handle stuff outside, or they might talk through an intercom. And then the final thing is also just intercoms for deliveries. A lot of different mechanic shops and car dealerships will have, sometimes a delivery bay, usually right next to the service garage, that handles taking delivery, and intercoms are absolutely perfect for that. So these are kind of the typical requirements that you'll run into when you're dealing with a car dealership. So let's talk a little bit more about the things to think about before we go and pick the right products for the situation. There's a whole bunch of different questions that we want to propose to the customer as we're kind of discussing and trying to pick the right products to meet their requirements. Of course, one of the most important ones is what phone system is in place. This is important to know, one, if any of our products would actually be supported on the platform, but also what special features that particular platform might have or might not have. Systems like RingCentral is just a great example. I talk about them all the time. They've got built-in paging groups through RingCentral, so it makes it really easy to create paging groups for the show floor, for the outdoor parking area, for the outdoor car lot, for the service area. That can all be done through Ring Central. So knowing the phone system that they're using is super duper important. But then also, is there an existing PA system there? Is there existing hardware and does it still work? And if so, would you like to keep using that, or do you want to go for an IP-based system? So just kind of leveraging the stuff that's already there. Size of the car lot is also super important. And I mean, this is something that we've really beaten in, talking about all the different paging equipment that we have. But the size of the car lot helps you determine, what and how many paging devices you're going to put out there. And then, is or is there not a service garage? Is this strictly a dealership where people just buy cars and leave? Or is this a place where they're kind of doing the full service, where you buy a car and then you bring it there for service? You get all your oil change, you get major repairs done there. Is it a kind of a full service car center over just, your corner used car lot? And also, where do customers park? Are customers parking, in a dedicated parking area? Do they have to park on the street? And that kind of stuff is important because that can help you add notification or emergency endpoints to those areas, just in case something happens and a customer needs to get in contact with the people at the dealership. But then also important is where the dealership is located, and that can help determine what products you want to put out there. If a dealership is in a sketchy area and being a young guy and is in his late teens, buying used cars out in the San Fernando Valley, I definitely came across some sketchy car dealerships out there. And as such, you want to be a little bit more cautious when you're installing, some expensive VoIP equipment out there on those lots. You just want to be careful when you're putting stuff out there. So these are all important questions to ask when you're trying to pick the right products. So the phone system is important, again, just because some phone systems have more features and they have features that others don't. Ring Central is always my key example. They've got the paging groups built in through Ring Central. They're one of the only hosted phone providers that actually do something like this. I really wish a lot more of the phone providers added some kind of a support like this, because it makes it so easy to utilize and bring in different paging equipment through the system. And plus, Ring Central does it for free, so you don't have to pay any additional cost to use your CyberData equipment on Ring Central in certain circumstances. So it's super duper powerful. But things like, say for example, 3CX, instead of doing like dedicated paging groups, they do multicast streams from 3CX to kind of facilitate the same thing that Ring Central does. So these are two major platforms that make paging really easy through it. And the others don't really do that. And the main differentiation, it's not necessarily a problem to say use Zoom and they don't have these paging group features. That just means you need a dedicated device to handle something like that. You need your linchpin. You need the real important product that kind of brings everything together. And we'll talk about that product when we get to the actual product recommendations. So then, the PA system and then the lot size are very important things to cover, because if they have an existing PA system, it might be sufficient. They might have, a relatively good outdoor paging system, say for their car lot, say maybe 10 years ago, they got some, good IP66 rated, PA horns mounted out there. They've got a, relatively recent amplifier. Everything works. You can really help them cut costs by, instead of going and ripping out all that existing hardware that works and rerunning cables and dealing with all the hullabaloo that you get of installing a new phone system, you can just reuse that existing PA system and save them a little bit of money. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. But understanding the dealership and the size and potential expansion of that dealership, if they're doing really good, they might want to say buy the neighboring parking lot to be able to park more cars and sell more cars. They might want to expand. So they might also want to consider more additional paging hardware to just supplement that existing PA system. They could do kind of a hybrid system where they've got an analog and an IP-based system, or fully IP-based. But knowing the size of that lot is super crucial before you proceed to go and spec out an actual system for a customer. Next, we move on to the service garage and dealing with customers. So for places like that, when you're going to be dealing with customers in kind of an outdoor environment, which is where you'll typically deal with customers, at least initially, you want to deal with stuff that's going to be IP rated, either IP65, like a lot of our intercoms and physical endpoints that people will interact with, or IP66 rated, like our big horn there. We'll talk about all these in a little bit more depth, but I wanted to have all the part numbers here for any reference. So some dealerships do or don't have a service garage, so it's really important to let people know, let all the techs know and the people that kind of handle the jobs for that service garage that a car has arrived. So they might want an outdoor help button, because really, how much do you need to interact with a customer over an intercom or one of our buttons? You really just need to know that they're there. Typically, all the interaction is going to be taken in person, because you need to get a signature, you need to exchange keys, and all that kind of stuff that comes with taking your car in for a service. So things like an intercom or a call button are super useful, just to get that notification. Hey, I'm such and such. I'm here with my Audi R8. I need to get this serviced. I need to get an oil change. What have you. They could very easily just hit that help button that could just have a preloaded WAV file in there that just says customer in the service area needs assistance. And then one of those people working the front desk can run up there with a clipboard and sign all the paperwork, get the keys, and the person can either come back when their car is finished, or like we used to, at least go sit in the waiting room until their car is finished and being worked on. But customer notification is only part of it. You really also want to have a way to notify customers, say if they're just kind of perusing the parking lot, or if they're sitting out there, or say there's kind of an emergency or some kind of an event. You would want some kind of notification out there, and that's where the IP66 horn would come in. That thing could just get mounted on a pole or on the side of the building. And that way, if there's any type of an emergency announcement, or just a car is finished being worked on announcement, that can easily be made through the horn, and it's protected from weather and birds with that nice big screen in there. But it's also important in the service bays, just to let techs know, as they're finishing up, say, an AC recharge, and somebody's getting their air conditioning system serviced before the summer months, just to let them know, hey, once you finish that job, go ahead and take your break, or hey, you've got so many more jobs lined up. Instead of having to walk out there and tell them, they could just make the announcement over one of these horns. So these horns are perfect whether they're indoors or outdoors. Really great options to kind of put in there, and these are just some good options when you're dealing with a service garage and end customers. So next, we kind of need to get into the dealership location. And you might have thought when I brought this up, why is it important where the dealership is located? And that's always something to consider. Definitely something that I considered when I was a teenager going through community college, got into a car accident. My car got totaled, somebody else's fault, so I had this big check to go out and get a used car. Couldn't really afford a new car because at that time, I was working kind of minimum wage jobs. So used cars were my only option, and I lived in the San Fernando Valley area, and there are a lot of sketchy used car places out there, and that was one of the determining factors for me. Say I'm pulling up to a used car dealership, and Canoga Park was one that I went to, and man, that place was sketchy. There were bullet holes in some of their signs. They had just these really old sketchy stuff. There was graffiti on the side of their building, and just pulling up, I saw that. I'm like, I'm not going to buy a car here. This is not a good place. And then I drove down to Sherman Oaks, found a nicer dealership, and got sold a lemon. But hey, that's the fun of buying used cars. So car dealership location is super important when you're considering the equipment that could go out there, just due to the area and the fact that you might be putting a $536 horn out there. Or you could go for a different product and end up putting an $82 horn out there. And that comes not only with the initial investment. Okay, you're dropping, quite a bit of money on a, good outdoor paging unit. How long is that thing going to be out there? How long is that thing going to last? Is this kind of a sketchy area where, you might get teenagers being teenagers and damaging stuff, or, some kids taking pot shots with their BB gun and taking, shooting at something, that kind of stuff happens in some areas. So in situations like that, if you're a little worried about the area that you might be speccing product out for, instead of going for one of our all-in-one IP66 horns, you might opt for our loudspeaker amplifier and have that mounted in more of a secure area, maybe in an area that couldn't be accessed from the street or on the interior of the building, and then run that horn outside. You've got a pretty good length of cable that you can run to one of these horns, and just mount that $80 horn outside. Because if somebody, say, backs into it with a truck, or the horn gets damaged, I'd much rather replace an $80 horn over a $500 horn. So things like that are important to consider. But it's not just what endpoints you put out there, it's where you place these endpoints. Because if you do opt for, say, that that expensive paging horn or an intercom that's located out there, you want to install them in an area where you can kind of deter theft, and that could be, say, placing it up on the top of, say, a light pole. So that way, it's up, 15, 20 feet in the air. It kind of deters somebody from potentially interacting with it or potentially stealing the thing. Or also using our Torx security screws when applicable, things for, say, like an intercom. So that way it's more of a deterrent. That way, they're not just dealing with a regular Phillips screwdriver, so that way they can get into it. And also utilizing the intrusion sensor on all of our intercom products. So that way, when the faceplate of the intercom is moved from that back box, the intercom immediately takes an action. And that can either be playing an audio file locally or making a call to a predetermined extension. They might still get away with that intercom, but at least you'll know of a specific time when that occurred, and hopefully you can go and check your cameras when something like that occurs. So this is all stuff to consider when you're speccing out equipment for a car dealership. So let's talk a little bit more about the options when you're dealing with outdoor paging. We've really got two options, which is actually quite a bit more options when you consider all the part numbers, but you're really dealing with two distinct products. You're dealing with either our SIP IP66 outdoor horn, part number 011457, or our loudspeaker amplifier that comes in two different flavors, either PoE or without PoE, and those are part numbers 011404 or part number 011405. And the only distinction between those for the loudspeaker amplifier is one comes included with a PoE AT injector, so that way it supplies all the power necessary for mounting two horns. Or if they've got a good PoE switch at the location, you don't necessarily need that included injector, and you can just get the one without that injector. But that's the only difference between these two part numbers. And these units are really powerful for outdoor paging because from the ground up, they're designed being IP66 rated. So they're going to be fine to put out there in the weather no matter what's going on, whether you're installing something in sunny Southern California or frigid, Minnesota. No matter where you end up putting one of these horns, they're going to work out there. So you really don't need to worry whatever environment you're placing one of these things in. They're weatherproof and rated for it. The nice thing with the IP66 horn that the loudspeaker amplifier doesn't have, the IP66 horn has that nice grill over the front of it, which just kind of deters things from nesting in there. That probably wouldn't be that common of occurrence, especially if these things are used relatively often. I can't imagine a bird's going to try to make a nest in a place where a really loud sound is coming from several times a day. But if the paging system is kind of seldomly used, you might have, say, a bird or something else that would go and try to build a nest in one of these locations. So that can really make the IP66 horn really ideal to put out in different locations, just because it's an all-in-one unit, it's easy to mount, it's easy to work with, it has good coverage, and it's got that nice grill in there. So it's kind of protected from not only the elements, but what else is out there in the elements. Not to say that the analog IP66 horn that you can use with the loudspeaker amplifier, of course sold separately, doesn't have that, but again, it's not a problem that you'll encounter that much, especially with the available space in the analog IP66 horn with that big center column in there. It doesn't really allow for a good spot for a bird to potentially nest in there. But these are all things to consider when you're dealing with an outdoor paging unit. The IP66 horn usually covers around 7,500 square feet, so one or two of these could likely cover an entire parking area for a car lot, whereas the loudspeaker amplifier with 2 horns. It covers around 10,000 square feet, so one of these could potentially cover an entire car lot. So it really kind of depends, again, on the size of the location to kind of pick the correct equipment for that. But you're really going to be dealing with these 2 main options. As we move forward to our service garage, so you really kind of need 2 different options for your service garage. You of course need, something to make announcements, but you need something for people to interact with. And it kind of depends on how the service garage is specifically used to pick the right endpoint. If you've got, say, a parking area outside of the service area that's kind of specifically meant for that, one place that I used to go to a lot as a kid, my parents always bought their Fords from Galpin Ford out there in the San Fernando Valley. They had a dedicated parking area for that. So things like a help button or a standard intercom could be really useful in that scenario. The customer can just walk up, press the help button. It plays that predetermined audio file to wherever it calls, or the intercom could be used, and you can have that full duplex 2-way communication with the person on the inside answering the call that says, hey, I'm such and such here. I'm here for this, say warranty recall or something like that. So there are 2 good options mainly for dealing with those distinct, like dedicated service garage areas. But if you've got, say, a service garage, say at a smaller location that might actually use that same location, say for employee entrances and customer use, you might opt for one of our keypad intercoms. So that way all of the employees can just walk up, punch in their own key code and be on their way. They don't have to make a phone call, but then all of those regular customers can just walk up, press that call button, and have that 2-way conversation with that service desk attendant. So that way they can go and just get that, get whoever they need out there to assist that potential client out there. And then finally, another good unit that can really be used for these outdoor areas, and especially actually in the service garage. Service garages can get really loud when you're dealing with the lifts, the air compressors, potentially air tools, especially if they're taking off tires and stuff. That stuff can get really loud. So you might need a strobe for visual notification in there, because those guys might be wearing earplugs. They might have their AirPods in and they're jamming, listening to podcasts as they're doing oil changes. So they might need that visual notification to know, hey, something's going on. I should pay attention. I should, turn off the air compressor. I should stop using my air ratchet. So that visual notification can be super important in service garages, but it can also be really helpful and exterior, say for customer areas. Say you've got an outdoor call button out there, and you could use one of our accessory outdoor call strobe kits and plug that into an intercom. And when that intercom is in a call, you could have that big strobe on the top of the pole blinking. So that way the attendant knows exactly where to go. This could be useful just for that, customer walking up for service, or if something sketchy is going on, it's the end of the day, somebody's, trying to get to their car over there. They didn't end up buying a car. They're leaving in their other car. And some creepy guys there in the parking lot. That way with this big blinky strobe light on top, that might deter that potentially creepy person or that, potential criminal that could be out there, and just alert everybody to where a potential problem is going on. So they're all really useful endpoints that have different use cases based on the requirements of that particular area. Next, we move on to our indoor showroom and office area. And this is where you'll want, you'll typically be dealing with maybe higher caliber clients. Maybe they're buying a little bit more expensive equipment. You might be dealing with, say a used car lot, and they've got all their Fords and their Chevys outside, but, they've got that one Lamborghini or that one Corvette that, they've had in the front office for years. Nobody ever buys it. Well, you might have a little bit more specialized and nicer equipment inside. Not to say that our outdoor equipment is ugly or bad, but you might have a little bit more professional looking equipment indoors to deal with that higher clientele. So that's where, various different products can come in, and making a real determination on which product is right for the situation really kind of depends on the infrastructure and the phone system that you're using. A great option for these indoor paging areas is our multicast speakers, because a lot of the times when you're dealing with these paging areas, you're not going to have, say, an individually addressable speaker, meaning you're going to make a dedicated SIP call to, say, our SIP speaker, kind of pictured right there in the middle. you're not really going to use that. You're not really going to be dealing with those one-to-one person calls with a lot of these endpoints. So multicast is a really good way to be able to page to say that entire show floor or that office area or the sales area if they've got kind of a cubicle set up for the individual salespeople as they're writing they're writing up all that paperwork. So you've got a lot of different options, whether they've got kind of a drop tile ceiling, we've got dedicated SIP speakers that could go into those ceiling tile drop-ins, or they could easily use one of our multicast ceiling speakers. They're a great option. They're a little bit more of a reduced cost, and they provide a really great, easy way to be able to page and a good amount of audio coverage to that. And they also look pretty good. But the same thing goes for our wall mount speakers. So if they don't have those drop tile ceilings and they opt for maybe the potentially more professional looking wall mount option, they look very akin to a nicer home surround sound system. The multicast wall mount speakers are fantastic for setups like that. They look very professional with a mount on there. They're easily angleable, and they've got a really good volume level to it. And they're at a good price point. So those are two really good options as we get to it. But then we've got kind of our full-fledged SIP speaker. This one's a lot more capable. It's a lot louder because it's designed as an AT speaker, and it's also just got a bigger speaker. Bigger speaker means more sound. It's real simple when you're dealing with speakers and sound output. The nice thing with this is it's got support for both SIP and multicast, so it's really flexible and can be platform independent. So if in a couple years, if say they've got a standard VoIP phone system and they plan to change it out and go for a cheaper provider, as long as that provider still supports SIP, they can just transfer this equipment over and keep using it there. So they almost become a little bit future-proof as compared to other potential options. And the nice thing with our speakers, our SIP speakers specifically, is they're sold on their own. So that way you get multiple different mounting options if you want to go and mount them in different areas. Say in the sales area, you might want those ceiling tile drop-ins. So that way, you've got your cubicle area. It doesn't need to be pretty. You just need the announcements to get made. You can do that ceiling tile drop-in. Nobody even knows there's a speaker there, but announcements still come through. Or say in a break room or a waiting area for customers, you might opt instead for going of a ceiling mount, you might opt for a SIP speaker mounted in one of our clock kits. So that way you can still get those announcements out to those customers waiting for their cars to get serviced, but the customer can also, get the clock there and they don't have to go and look at their watch. Man, it's taken 45 minutes for them to do an oil change. Why am I paying them $60? They can go and, instead of looking at their watch, they can look at that nice clock on the wall. But we also have wall mounting options without that clock. The nice thing that I like about our wall mount options is they're really easy to mount with their design. They've got a back box that you can go and mount the actual, you can actually mount to the wall, and then you just kind of screw the speaker into that big hole cut out there, and you just join the two together and join in a couple screws. So it makes mounting these really, really easy during installation. And they're really, really capable, great options to throw out there. And another thing that I also just want to hit on this, because strobes are useful just about everywhere. Visual notification is so powerful because sometimes, even in not loud environments, visual notification can just kind of jar people and get them to kind of look up away from their phone. Being a millennial, I definitely have gotten zoned into my phone and not paid attention when people are trying to get, my attention just because they're like, hey, Paul, Paul, they just start yelling at me and I'm not paying attention. And they'll kind of wave their hand in front of your face and like, oh, you see them there, that visual notification. Strobes can do that same thing where people might, out of the corner of their eye, say they're, in a good Twitter flame thread, they're arguing with somebody over Twitter, they're not paying attention. They don't hear, the service tech going announcing, hey, for the third time, this car is ready, come get your car. They might be able to see that blinky light on the wall that gets them to look away from Twitter for a moment and see, oh, my car's done. Let me put my phone away and go help out. So the RGB strobes are super duper powerful in both loud environments and regular office environments, just for that visual notification, because sometimes, that can get people to look away from whatever distractions they're involved with. Now, as we bring everything together, our capstone, the most important product that we'll talk about today, the SIP paging server. This thing really allows the entire system and setup that we've talked about to function. Not everybody's going to end up being on, the two main platforms that I mentioned, RingCentral or 3CX. They very well might be. A lot of car dealerships, especially that I've spoken with, are using RingCentral. But if they're not, they need something to bring everything together, and that's where our SIP paging server comes in. Part number 011146. And this thing comes together by being that SIP2 multicast out style device. This one's very much like our SIP paging adapter that kind of bridges the gap in between that analog system and the new VoIP system. It's the exact same hardware, but different software. This one has 100 different multicast paging groups built into it, which allows that indoor and outdoor paging zones. You can have, say, group 00 is your all page. You need to make your emergency announcement, or you just can't find that one sales guy. You could make that all page and let everybody know, or you can zone it where, say, group 01 would be your outdoor only page, 02 would be your service garage, and 03 would be your indoor customer waiting sales area. So with this unit, it's got all this different multicast paging capability built into it. You buy one box, you get all this capability built into it. But it also has a bell scheduler built into it, which is super useful for just, say, break bells. If you've got, different staff, say some part-time guys in the service garage, or, potentially part-time people working in the front office. Say you've got a little bit more staff, so you're in a really big place like Galpin Ford, the biggest Ford dealer on the West Coast. Actually, I think also in the U.S. That doesn't matter. I'm not here to talk about them. But it gives you that capability to do those break bells instead of having to initiate it or having to remind people, hey, you need to clock out, you're at 5 hours. If you go a minute over, we have to pay you an extra hour or something like that. With that break bell built into it, you've got that automatic notification that'll happen with no interaction after you set it up. So if you need that capability, you can do that. But it's not only just break bells. That's one of the things that I think people spend too much time thinking about it. Oh, it's got a bell scheduler built into it. I don't need bells, but I want announcements to go off every hour. Man, what could I do to do that? You could use a bell scheduler. Bells, at the end of the day, in terms of the paging server, are just audio files. So if you've got an audio file that you want your paging server to play at a particular time on a particular day, you can do that with the scheduled event capability. So it really becomes the capstone of the potential system that you're building, because it provides that potential IP to analog connection, that multicast capability, and those automatic announcements. So this one unit, this one box that you buy, kind of brings everything together and allows all the different products that we've talked about today to function in the manner that we've discussed. So the SIP paging server is by all end all the most important product that I think we've discussed today. So how the whole system works, because that's important. I can go and spec out and talk about, okay, you need this product, that goes there. How does it work? Oh, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. Just cut me a check. So knowing how it works is super duper important when you're pitching something like this to a potential customer. Understanding that the outdoor and indoor groups are going to be different, and an all page to tie them all together is super duper important when you're discussing a paging system with somebody. And just like the brief example that I gave, 00 is your all page, 01 is your outdoor, 02 is your service garage, and 03 is your indoor. You've got 100 different groups to play with on the paging server, so you can get real specific. So if you're dealing with a real big car lot, you could have the west side of the car lot, the east side of the car lot. You could go and zone it even more. But understanding how these different groups work and being able to give examples is super important. And then understanding, okay, how the heck do I trigger all these groups? I got this paging server. What do I call? You call the paging server, and then you select that particular group with a DTMF tone, and that can either be, pressing 00 on your, say, regular desk phone, on your smartphone with a associated app, or even through, say, a soft client on your PC. Say if you've got a little bit more advanced front office area and they've all got kind of headsets as they're working that, you can do it through a soft phone too. But just kind of understanding how the paging server works in general is really important and really crucial to understanding this particular system. And then when you're dealing with your intercoms and your call buttons, those are specifically likely going to be calling a ring group. And what a ring group is, it's just multiple groups of phones or phone numbers that are tied together that when a call comes in at, say, 333, instead of ringing just one phone, it rings all of the phones tied to that particular extension number. So when somebody walks up or, they drive up to the service desk and they're trying to, bring in their car for an oil change, they press that intercom call button and it rings all the phones in the front office because somebody might be tied up on a call, somebody else might be busy, and it might even tie in one or two of the sales guys if all the service techs are busy. So just understanding how the whole system works is really important to be able to pitch this. So finally, let's just kind of bring it all together. Let's talk about the car dealership paging in general. So when you're going and speccing out a potential car dealership opportunity, you want to review the location, size, and existing hardware for that particular dealership. So that way you understand what the requirements are, what hardware you want to use in that area, and what you might not need to replace. So just kind of cover all of that, helps you understand the requirements and the expectations from the customer to go and facilitate the paging requirements and needs that they have for this location. Every location is going to be different, so that's why we covered a whole bunch of different options, because I like to be versatile. The more arrows in your quiver, the more targets you hit. Once you've got all those questions answered from the customer, you want to go and design the particular system to go and implement the hardware. You want to go and design, okay, they've got these requirements. I need two-way communication. I need loud ringing capability. Okay, so we want a paging server, maybe an IP66 horn, and an intercom. And you spec all that out. And having that paging server in there brings everything together. That becomes the capstone that helps bridge the connection between the indoor phone system and the outdoor paging. So just having all those different parts and pieces in there and knowing how they function works. And this is one week where I don't actually have any definitions because we didn't cover any acronyms or anything.
Thank you for watching this edition of CyberSchool. If you have any questions, please get in contact with our sales department. They are available by email at sales@cyberdata.net or by phone at 831-373-2601 extension 334. Please make sure to like this video and subscribe for more content like this from CyberData.